Hey everybody, I'm Katallina, and today we're here to talk about episode 9 of the Ossan Newbie Adventurer. This week's episode was really good, but it seemed to really kick up a storm within the community. For me, it really brought forward an incredibly important question as a writer, which is, whose story is this anyway? Because one of the key things you have to think about, depending on the medium that a story is taking place in, is who is the central character or characters of the story, and who is the audience for the story. Because in a situation like what happened in this episode, depending on how cultural pressures and favors and flavors kind of come together, that can become an extremely conflicting situation. And I definitely saw that as I examined different reactions that were going on within the community. Personally, I was actually very impressed with the episode, but in all honesty, I went and looked at some different ideas and comments before I had seen it, which I usually don't do that. I usually go in the other order. And I listened to what some people were saying, and what it seemed to come down to for a lot of people was they were very afraid of the idea that this was going to become a damsel in distress moment, and that made them really mad. And I thought that was really weird because the thing is, at the end of the day, regardless of the reality that anyone can hypothetically watch the Ossan Newbie Adventurer, this is definitely a story for boys or men who are dealing with feeling that they are inadequate or that they miss some aspect in life. I mean, come on. In one of the first episodes, we literally had two girls walking toward each other with their breasts being highlighted, and all that was missing to make it a meme was the fucking dueling banjos music. It was funny, but I mean, it makes it very clear who this is about. The fact that every time we see the opening sequence, we see Renette's chest appear before she does. We know who this is for. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's actually completely normal. People think like that. People shouldn't act on that. Nobody should be grabbing anybody or something. But the thought patterns, those are normal. So when this whole situation happens with Angelica going through this fight against the red lizard guy, I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, yeah, she's going to lose. It's not even that she's going to lose, it's that she has to lose. And there are reasons for this. It actually has nothing to do with her being a woman. If she had been a man, and Rick had been instructing him instead of her, if we'd had, for example, that elderly gentleman or the other middle-aged guy from earlier in the season, and that had ended up being the person Rick took through the training, the result would still have to have been the same. And I've got several reasons why for you. First up, if Angelica had beaten the red scaly dude, her next challenge would be facing Rick. Given that Rick trained her with the intent of her being able to beat Scaly Guy, number one, her objective and motivation as a character would already be complete, which would hollow out the fight between her and Rick. Number two, we've already seen Angelica and Rick fight, and while Angelica has unquestionably made good strides and improvements, they wouldn't be anything against Rick because Rick has been continuing to improve in the same time span, and Rick was already 17,000 miles ahead because he spent 2 years training and doing this crazy-ass regimen with his guild. Thirdly, there would be no motivation for a fight between Rick and Angelica outside of the fact that they both happen to be in the pugilist tournament. So then that would ultimately, of course, have to lead to Rick defeating Angelica, which would have no emotional payoff. By allowing Angelica to be defeated by the vile, disgusting, nasty-tempered, red-scaled prick that she got defeated by, we present several different pieces of information that make for much better and stronger storytelling. The first of these is actually that they don't just instantly let the jerk one-shot her or something. The show does a really great job of allowing us to see that Angelica has made tremendous strides, that Angelica can actually hit the dude and cause damage, that Angelica has worked very hard, and that her skills and abilities have definitely improved from where we saw them at in episode 1 of the season. However, it's important for us to see that although Angelica has improved, that doesn't necessarily mean that she's on Red Scaly Lizardman's level. And it has nothing to do with her being better or worse than him. It has to do with the fact that she does not have his level of natural aptitude. Because, I mean, we find out he's part dragon. This should not surprise anybody. But we also have the reality, as we learn from the second half of the episode, that Angelica's limitation isn't something about self-worth or self-competence. It's that she just hasn't been training long enough to reach the level that would be needed to address the person she's fighting. And what we get in the second half of the episode isn't the traditional damsel in distress, I will defeat you because you hurt my friend, or I must defend woman, or whatever else. We actually get this really interesting and really beautiful use of the time Rick has spent training Angelica, and Rick as her mentor, actually strengthening her not only in body as he's been doing by doing the training with her every day, but also making sure that she is strong enough to continue to endure the challenges of training, which include defeat, and ensure that she still wants to keep training, because continuing with something that you're doing is one of the most important things that you can be doing. When you're working on something and you're doing it day in and day out, it doesn't matter whether it's fighting, it doesn't matter whether it's going to school, it doesn't matter whether it's going to your job every day, it doesn't matter whether it's writing a book, it doesn't matter whether it's me coming on here and making a video. That consistency can start to wear on you, and making sure that you have the internal fortitude to keep going is crucial. And Rick highlights and showcases this not only to Angelica, but to the audience in one of the most beautiful displays of both personal vengeance for his friend, but also teaching and guiding her and the viewer in an incredible display showcasing the gradual future increases that she is going to have in her strength. And the way that the show works to show that she becomes aware of what he is doing, that she can recognize the moves, and then even having the art show it as though she and he are making the punches together is one of the most glorious visualizations of something like this that I've ever seen. This is one of the finest examples of a master and student teaching moment that I've ever seen in anime. I mean, there are some other ones that are really good, but this one is just so wholesome and positive and beautiful. And yet it also, for those who are angry on Angelica's behalf because she was bullied, because she was beaten down, because the red guy didn't just want to win at the end, he got to a point where he wanted to kill her. It still granted those of us who wanted closure and satisfaction for that the emotional payoff that we wanted as well. It struck an absolutely fantastic balance that really showcased just how smart the writing in the show can be, even though the show can also have moments where it's absolutely silly and absurd. It also did a great job at showing some of the other characters' reactions. I mean, it was nice seeing the other members of Rick's team or guild being concerned for Angelica's safety. We also see different aspects to Snape's character. He's certainly not perfect, but he's not as maligned as we might have thought. It doesn't mean that he is going to end up with Angelica or that he should, but it does show that he's not an outright monster, and I think that it's really great that they took the particular angles with him that they did. But overall, I don't just think this is one of the best episodes of the Ossan Newbie Adventurer, but also for me personally, one of the best episodes of this season that I have seen so far, and I was thoroughly impressed because with the kind of situation that they put forward in this episode, especially coming from a Western context, there is so much here that could actually create division and fighting and frustration and any number of other things. And yet, despite the fact that, of course, what we think and what we're doing over here is not the primary factor for anime, for obvious reasons, the story still manages to successfully tell a very compelling and interesting tale without actually needing to sacrifice either Rick or Angelica or any of the other side characters in order to do it. As for how I think things are going to go moving forward, we've just seen the first of the two semi-final matches, which was of course Rick versus Red Scaly Man. On the other side of the table, we're going to end up, I don't know whether we'll see it or not, but what's going to happen is going to be our orc friend versus the cat boy or cat man. And the thing is, some people have theorized that Rick is going to end up fighting against his teacher, but I don't think that's going to happen, and I'll explain to you why. I don't think that's going to happen because orc teacher and Rick both have the same goal. They both want the belt. They both want the belt for the same reason. And there's no actual conflict or tension over who's going to get the belt because they both have the same end objective. If something happens to orc teacher, whether it's the orc teacher for whatever reason is convinced to let Catman win, or if some diabolical thing happens, or if a crisis happens and orc teacher has to step out, or any number of other things, leaving Rick to fight Catman, that creates a new form of tension and conflict because there's still a possibility that our team as a whole can still get the belt. Without the Catman being in the final fight, that danger and that risk of loss is going to be null and void, and that's going to be a problem. But that's just my opinion on the subject. We'll have to see what happens going forward. Anyway, as you could probably tell, I definitely really enjoyed this episode, and it definitely gave me a lot of food for thought. I hope that people will take a bit more of a breath and be more calm about checking out situations that might seem uncomfortable to them when stories do things that don't necessarily follow what we would necessarily think of as the most natural alignment for them within the context of modern culture. Because if we permit something to become a default where we automatically expect that certain behaviors and situations are going to happen, we don't actually get rid of old things where these kinds of behaviors happened, old stereotypes, old tropes, old cliches. All we end up doing is replacing them with new ones, and that doesn't actually address the core problem, which isn't any individual cliche or trope or idea in and of itself, but rather the automatic presumption of how a story is going to go based off of cultural concepts. And that leads to bad writing. But those are just my thoughts. I'd love to know what you guys are thinking, so drop a comment below and let me know, and I'll talk to you in the next video. See you later. Bye!